Okay, it is 2:03, and we will call to order this meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the Housing Authority of the City of Buenaventura. Roll call, please.
Member Simonson?
Here.
Member Sacedo?
Yes.
Chair Polanski?
Here. Thank you very much.
Here. Oh.
You are not. Okay, we go to adopting the agenda 1.03. Any changes recommended by staff?
No changes.
Okay, entertain a motion.
Consent agenda? No, adopt the agenda. I'll second.
Okay, thank you very much. We have the motion from Salva. We have the second from Kate. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes unanimously. Move on to item number 2, consent agenda. Consent agenda is pretty short, but we will take this item in its entirety. As a commissioner would like to pull the item for a separate discussion, or I will entertain a motion if the minutes look okay.
Move to approve consent agenda items.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, Salva is the maker of the motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety. Kate is the second. We do have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Sweet. We move on to item number 3, public communications. This is the opportunity for any member of the public to speak to the Finance and Operations Committee. It may be agendized or not agendized, but it must be within the purview of the Finance and Operations Committee. I don't have any speaker slips. Is there anybody, though, that cares to speak during public comment? Seeing none, we will, anybody online?
Nobody through email or text, and on Zoom? Anybody on Zoom that wishes to give public comment? No.
Okay, thank you very much. We will close public communications and we will move to our one formal action item that our committee looks forward to every year. This is reviewing, offering comments and further direction pertaining to the development of the preliminary proposed 2025 fiscal year annual operating budget of the Housing Authority of the City of San Buenaventura. And it seems like we just did this for 2024, but time moves ever faster.
Right. I'll turn it over to Joe. All right, full screen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is the 2025 budget. It represents the first budget with the new type of fiscal year format that hasn't been approved by HUD yet. I checked in on it. They're still reviewing it, which should be an issue with changing it. The original intent was to present a 15-month budget, but there was limitations on Yardi, our accounting software, that they didn't have anything in between 12 and 20. So I opted to look at 20. So in a way, you're looking at apples and oranges when you compare it. But what I did on the comparison part of how we're doing in 24 versus what we budgeted in 24 versus what's budgeted in 25. You'll see it in the schedule, the attached schedule. There's a separate on all the individual entities. I made it apples and apples where I looked at what would be 12 months for in what was projected out to be 20. So I made it apples and apples for your convenience, though the budget before you, as opposed to what was the goal of presenting you with a 15-month budget, is really a 20-month budget. But once we get adopted, once we go into the new fiscal year, it's just a little workaround we have to do on Yardi. But Yardi wouldn't allow us to do a 15-month budget, except that we would have to create a mirror set of properties, and for accounting wise, that was going to be a nightmare. So we decided to go with 20.
And Joe, if you could explain for those that don't know why we're doing a 15-month budget as
Oh,
opposed to our
because-
normal 12-month.
Right, because we're gonna be converting, we have requested to made the request to HUD to change our fiscal year from a federal fiscal year to a calendar fiscal year, to mirror everything else that we have here at the Housing Authority, that we have it on a calendar fiscal year. Because there's a lot of complexities when you mix 2 fiscal years together, especially on payroll. And on services such as IT, legal, those items that have a fee for service, because you would have to have a different rate for the first 3 months of the fiscal year, then change it over to the different rate starting in January. So by having everything under the same banner per se, it'll be much simpler, less of a headache. And for our auditors, it's also less of a headache too.
So excuse me for interrupting you. So none of our funders, grantors, programs that we work with have a fiscal year? So like
Well,
what-
actually, under Section 8, they run on a calendar fiscal year,
Okay,
but their budget is on the federal fiscal year.
right.
So that was like always a little bit an issue for Diane's group.
Well, there's a
So-
federal fiscal year, there's a fiscal year, then there's a calendar year.
Right, well,
There's a
okay.
state fiscal year.
And
There's the federal fiscal year, which is the October. Then there's a traditional fiscal year that I was always familiar with, which ran from July 1, which Happy New Year is Monday.
Right.
And like cities and counties operate
And the
under the
state.
fiscal year. And the state, right.
Mhm.
Then you have the federal fiscal year,
Right.
which we were under. Then there's a calendar fiscal year,
Okay.
which
Runs January through
which
December.
our LPs run, and there's even some entities that run under a calendar fiscal year.
And many housing authorities have gone to the calendar fiscal year simply
Right.
because of Section 8 and
Yeah.
some of the other
Yeah.
programs.
So I'm just wondering, so then all of our calendars will align?
Yes, yes. Yes, all the calendars will align, just like how in the few, what is it, pretty soon we're gonna have all the.
Next
moons,
year,
all the planets align on one thing and all hell will break loose on that day.
they'll align next year,
Yeah, so-
2025. So.
And frankly, it's messy right now,
Yes.
Right.
but once we get into the new fiscal year, it
Yeah.
all will align. and be-
Oh, it gets confused. You gotta remember, like, what fiscal year are we under for this one? What fiscal year are we under in this
Right.
one? So it makes it simple. The only technical side that we would have to work with is once it gets approved by HUD, which should be no reason why they shouldn't, is that we would have to do a short audit for the 3 months from October to December. That's the only thing we have to do, but tax-wise, there's really nothing. If anything, it's filing a form with the IRS saying we changed our fiscal year.
So it'll just be fiscal year 25 instead of fiscal year 24, 25.
Exactly. Yeah, we won't have to do that 24, 25.
25, 22.
Yeah, right. So this is just 25.
Yeah, thanks for that. Not everybody's been following it.
Right, right. Actually, we changed that when we adopted the last budget. You gave us a go ahead. But because HUD likes to say, just don't, it was kind of recommended to wait until the last second to give them documents. So, after all that headache and trying to figure out how to make everything apples and apples as opposed to apples and oranges, I like to present to you the budget. And this is my 6th budget since I've been here. And I could confidently say that there may not be a need to do another meeting, F&O, but once again, that's the committee's discretion. Because this is the 6th budget, we were not, except for a couple entities that are really not critical per se, that you would need to have them come back. This is a solid budget. We didn't have issues like where a major component was especially like the amps, they were in a deficit, which they weren't. So I don't want to bore you with, this is the constant stuff. No, there's no animation in this one.
Why not?
Because this is the boring finance and operations committee, which you guys need to have.
Don't
your
make it
pencil
make it
behind
funny.
your ear,
Your audience.
paying attention and making notes. Where's your pencil?
The animation is why some of these folks showed up.
Well, I'm already got my back against the wall on that one. I don't know what to do. And luckily enough, there's property manager that's gonna help me, who is a weekend photographer for weddings and stuff. So we might come up with something. Maybe involving a drone. I don't know, you know.
Wow.
So
Surprise,
look at you.
surprise us.
See, will you be here or on a bike trip?
There you go.
The last time I did that really nice presentation, you were on a bike trip.
500 drones.
The 500 drone one?
I'm gonna keep them crashing into each other. I don't know.
Okay, and what I also did is I corrected, the last meeting that we had on the mid-year budget review. We were so early in terms of trying to figure out how it's gonna end. This one I took a good attempt, so. What I'm putting in there is what I project may be. What will happen at the end of fiscal year 24 and September 30th. Okay. So. Once again, this is going over our history, which you've seen over and over, like you, the only one that's really different is this 23. For you on historical, and so if you wanna, I put it on that, I did a printout of the presentation of what, if you wanna follow that.
But the important thing, and a good reason for going back is to show that we've had a net surplus.
Right,
In
right.
each of the.
Right. And once again, I always gotta remember, we're not a business, and that surplus looks really good for a business, but we're
Not for
government.
profit.
No, we're not for profit, so that didn't happen. And this is how I project out. I think it's different from what I presented back in the mid-year. Because I projected out until using numbers at the end of April 30th, which are a little bit more solid numbers. The next one, that's when I present it to the board, that'll show either May or June, depending on when we get the June numbers in time. So that'll give you a better indication. So just based on how we end up with April. It shows we're gonna have about a $1.7 million surplus. It shows, okay, it may change. Okay? Especially there may be some like difference in labor costs, because a lot of times we project out a full year for the labor. But that we've had a couple of people retire and move on to other areas too. So the salary costs have fluctuated. So.
And of course, we use our surplus, we have a very narrow mission, so we use it for affordable housing development.
Right.
For services.
Right. So this kind of shows you like, it's kind of indicative of how the housing authority has grown. Forget about that blip. I always, remind you why we have that big blip in 15, because it was a lot of sale of property that happened. Number of parcels were sold. So you had that big blip. But it's been escalating.
Partnerships.
Right.
So we kept most of it.
And this kind of gives you an idea of like comparing what was budgeted to what actually happens. Obviously, there's that big blip in 15 or 16, excuse me. But everything's kind of on the rising scale, but once again, like reiterate, because the housing authority is growing in many ways. I mean, a lot on the LP side, but also internally and structurally, we're growing.
And of course, just for clarification, it looks like a sale of properties, but it's actually repositioning. We
Right.
still control those properties, it's just out of public housing and into the tax credit program.
Now, this is our expenditures. It kind of goes hand in hand as we grow, our expenses go up. But it's always kind of in line. We don't have that abnormal, here's our budget, and we actually spent that much. That's not really the case. And what I like to put always in here, that we still have a little over 3 months left in the fiscal year. Obviously, in the numbers I presented to you, there's a lot more months. There's by almost a half a year left, but in terms of operating wise, we have a little over 3 months, 3 months and a week, if you think about it. Left in the old fiscal year, in the federal fiscal year, right, which will be our old fiscal year. So this is proposed operating budget, okay? Now, don't be alarmed by the numbers, because once again, this is a 20-month scenario. Okay? It's a 20-month scenario, but I provided you with apples and apples numbers to give you a 12-month to 12-month comparison. Though the budget will really be a 15-month budget if you think about it. And it's just all, it'll be workarounds that we need to do on
It's
Yardi.
odd that Yardi has a 12-month option.
And a 20-month option, but
not
nothing,
yeah,
nothing in the middle,
15.
not a 15,
Anyway,
or not even 18-month.
I
You would
didn't know
think,
20 is odd.
no, you would think it would be 18,
Yeah.
but yeah,
You're not-
20 is an odd number.
Anyway,
And you cannot create something that would be helpful to you without creating a new universe. And that's a nightmare on accounting wise.
Mhm.
Okay, so don't, be concerned on the large amount. It's basically double what you adopted in the past. So these are the numbers right now as it stands as of today. And that's why how I started off this is my 6th time doing the budget. And we always come back with a long list of projects that we need to work on, be concerned about, that we always come back to the next meeting. Okay, now we whittled that deficit down. We only have deficits in development, which is always triggered by the developer fees. That's your source of revenue. And maintenance, which more it's an operational. They're not outside of their fee for service, they're not a revenue generating entity. So having a deficit of 85,000, I'm not concerned about. I mean, we could work on it to reduce it further, but it's nothing that you need to, said, oh, wow, we're in a deficit with maintenance, what we're gonna do. Now, if maintenance was the main generator revenue for the housing authority. If we relied solely on maintenance fees, then I would be concerned.
and because the development number is a large number, it's just we've earned the developer fees.
Yeah,
When they can.
Exactly, I mean, it's. I mean, you're familiar with it at Santa Barbara, but it's cyclical. You're gonna have your good years and you're gonna have your okay years. We've had like periods of time where we've had like an okay budget and ends up being a good budget for development because they were able to pull in fees that should have been either from the past fiscal year or from the future fiscal year into the budget year, so.
And we oftentimes don't know until the audits are done for the particular properties.
And if you recall last year, Chair Polanski asked us to take a look at what forecasted revenue developer fees. And it was in the $8 million range. That was as of last year. That's projected out to the future.
Yeah.
So that's something to always consider, that we have that developer fees projected out in the future.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In any of these programs, are any of these funds in trust? Or are they all
No, this is all, and it's not, we're not looking at.
monies that?
This is all money money that we're getting for the year and money that's being spent. It's almost like, I know in cities, cities and counties, there's and Jeff and I had the conversation about they have carryover funds. And that was a situation with development prior to me coming here. They always had a carryover fund line item. This is basically what I like to call zero-based budgeting. You start from zero. So you're wiping the slate clean, both on expenses and on income.
Well, some of our funders, for example, in my programs, they give us the money up front.
Yeah,
And so we put it in a trust and then throughout the year.
well, yeah, but we
But
get,
we're also earning interest on it, so.
yeah, in like for our half payments and all that, we get a lot. We don't have anything in advance. In that way, it's usually generated for the month.
Right.
The thing that would come closest to that, so who would be the hat?
Yeah.
Because that is for a very specific purpose,
Yeah,
but it
but
flows
we only
in.
get it once.
Right.
We know what we're getting, but we're only given it at the end of the month. They're sent over on July, like usually, like we'll probably get it on Friday for July 1, because July 1's on Monday this year.
But that's the closest to what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
referring to.
Carol's here.
And the one that you could probably think of that probably be more like that is community services. Where they have a number of the entities like the Ross grant, they have an FSS grant, they have grants. They know in advance, so but we don't hold it. We have to direct HUD, we need this amount of money
Right, okay.
for the month. So we ask them to withdraw from but we don't hold those funds. And there's like maybe like a handful, like a Montecito grant. That goes to community services that they give the money up front, like 25,000.
Mhm.
That's probably one of the only few things I could think of right now in your type of scenario. So as you can see, everything is fine. I mean, a lot of especially like the Ross and the FSS, okay, there's a slim margin, but you try to, especially on the FSS, you really want to try to keep it because you want to match the grant. So,
We want to spend all the grant, not leave it
Right.
on the table. Right.
yeah, the objective, you
Yeah.
really don't want to return the money.
Right. And I think, Joe, this year going forward, we're looking at those grants on a more quarterly basis that we try
Oh.
during the year. If not
And-
more often than that.
Actually, we're having a meeting tomorrow on it, so we're trying to do it on a
Yeah.
monthly
Regular.
basis too. Because, we always get the frantic phone calls in November and December of a grant year.
Yeah.
Because they run on they run on the calendar a lot of times.
Yeah.
We got, we have, I hate using God's wrong. We have 12,000 left and we only gonna use 6,000 on salary, so they gotta go out and and sign up for conferences in the future so they could spend that money down. So, because a lot of times, they require it to be spent within that
Right.
month. You have to commit the funds within that month. So as you can tell, it's pretty healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it's a small amount surplus. But once again, we're not a business. It's and yes, we could probably increase it if we tighten up, like maybe, we further sharpen our pencils in other departments, increase the surplus in those departments. But as a whole, right now, it's in good shape, very good shape.
Yeah.
Especially for being the first presentation to the board.
Right.
So just identifying the two areas right now. Now, this is the proposed one. Now, we have a couple of projects on, obviously, everybody's familiar with Valentine Road. And then we have Santa Clara coming up. That's rehab, that's the actual reconstruction of Santa Clara apartments. So obviously, Valentine Road's gonna take a lot of the staffing. And you'll see on the schedule about what we're gonna be adding in staff. We're gonna be up to 93 people. If we project out 93. And you're thinking, how can we afford 93? Well, when I explain to it, you'll see, how we could afford it. The housing authority won't have the burden.
Well, I would add to that too, we're also looking at phase 4 of Westview. We don't have an exact plan yet.
Yeah.
But we have a strategy to get there, so that will be on towards. And a few other projects, Karen and I.
Okay, so we said 93, it's going up. Now, the salary costs that we have on here, okay? Includes step increase, does not include a COLA. It includes positions that are empty that we've kept in there. They may not be filled immediately in the fiscal year. One position may be filled in February. There may be other positions that may not be filled. We don't know, but we put them as a placeholder in the budget. Now, these are the additional employees that'll be added. These aren't positions like in the past, like we had the thing for the facilities engineer. We don't have that in our roster of positions, so we call that out. Same thing with these are we already have these positions in our roster. So there's nothing unusual. The only ones that would have the direct impact on the housing authority are the first three. Because those would be section 8. Okay, everything else is the burden on the property, yes.
So this may be more Cosina related, but was there also a talk about a grant writer? I feel like we had talked a little bit about a grant writer.
We're not, because these are all previously approved positions.
Oh, okay.
And we haven't flushed out Christina enough to actually make a proposal, but if that becomes something we need to do, and I believe it would be helpful, it might not be a full-time grant writer.
Yeah,
But we are looking at that kind of position.
yeah, I mean, and also
Yeah.
grant writer could be on a contract, on a need by need basis. I know a lot of people who do that.
It doesn't have to be an employee, it could be a
Yeah.
contracted employee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like they would charge you.
Like another agency?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Independent
like,
person that comes in.
Or
works
yeah.
on
by their
hours.
Cause there's grant writers out there.
Yeah, there are
When we
grant-
went to the new one.
Yeah.
We met a few.
Yeah, we don't have to have an employee, it could be a contractor.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, and they charge you like on, okay, you're getting a $1 million grant, I'll charge you 1.5% of what you're applying for. That's their fee. So that's an example. So,
Okay.
So Joe,
thanks.
so here, you have these positions, and then on top of those, you have other positions that are vacant, so total will be 93 employees.
93, right.
So these are about 10?
Yeah, but now, see, there's some of them that are multiple.
Well, yeah.
Now, these are all projected. They may change. They may be less than what they are, okay? But once again, that's a response. Everything except for the first three are responsibility of the property. It's like in Buenavita's case, we have a property manager that shares duties between at the current, we are right now, that shares duties with both Johnson Gardens and Buenavita. So we're looking to just move that property manager away from Buenavita, so you're gonna have a separate property manager for Buenavita and Johnson Gardens as opposed to a shared property manager.
How many vacant positions do you have?
Oh, 4, 5, I think off the top.
Currently advertised, but
We have
Yeah,
a bunch. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot.
yeah. Because we, that's counting the retirements and people moved on to other areas, so.
Vacant positions.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Vacant. positions.
Vacant,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But they're vacant, but I budgeted.
Mhm.
And I budgeted at their level of pay, so they may not be that much.
So you budget at the top of the level, Johnson? Is that what you're
At
saying?
whatever, on a vacant position, at whatever the person that they would be, that's lead, that had left, I don't change that salary. So if they were at the step 10 at the highest grade, I just leave it as that, as a placeholder. So there's a lot of, so the numbers I present to you, like especially on the salary part, they reflect the full
Right.
budget period. But then I mentioned, we may have a vacancy or we may have a position that won't get filled until mid-year.
And we, as you know, we're embarking on our first performance evaluation process for a long time, and there are costs to that because we want to reward employees that have a higher score in the performance process. So there'll be a cost to that once that stuff flows out over the summer. We're deep in it right now with everybody doing their own evaluations and those of their employees, but there will be a cost to that once that process is over and we start having assigned increases for basically the different levels of scoring they get in the process. So Joe's been able to build into the budget our ability to make those changes in the budget.
Right.
Okay.
Right items is that going?
But
The incentives for good PRs.
it did
It's
be
not a
under,
separate line item,
no,
it's just under the.
it's under
personnel.
employee.
Yeah.
It's kind of built into
Built
the,
into the
it,
salary.
it's in the, I have a buffer of 30%
Mm,
of benefits. And that's more than enough, so it kind of fills in
Okay.
that gap. Now, one of the reasons too that I put in here that even though they're not a direct obligation of the housing authority, their pension liability is, even though it's kind of indirectly paid by others, but if the burden falls on the housing authority to pay the bill. Okay, so that's why I included these entities, these positions.
Yeah.
In there, because it falls, it's on our shoulder to pay that bill, which should be coming up.
So you brought up another question then, because each employee comes with additional expenses.
Yeah.
Direct and indirect.
Right, we had talked about that, like, how do they get their pencils and papers and a computer?
Rent, IT.
Yeah,
phone.
yeah. It's all built into that kind of like that 30% buffer that I do. I mean, in practicality, it's probably like 22.5, 25%. So that extra buffer kind of builds in that. That
That's the
extra
buffer that on average
Yeah.
gives us money to give employees bumps based on their performance. 'Cause it's all in there. Yeah, and I would say too, as we go forward, but there's always moving parts. So with Fred's retirement, we're looking at sort of restructuring the maintenance team to respond to that retirement. We're also looking at the community services team, which Stephanie's gone, and sort of dividing community services and case management in sort of two different functions. And so there are some other moving parts that we're talking about. Diane's looking at sort of restructuring Section 8, so there's actually some tiered opportunity for promotion within Section 8, because it's pretty flat right now, and we're trying to create some layers for people to have places to promote to. And going back to maintenance, I found this out when Fred was retired. So Fred was here for 37 years. He was a maintenance tech for 34 of those 37 years, or something like that. One position and the whole time he was here, instead of having, like other places have maintenance 1, a maintenance 2, a maintenance 3, and you move up based on your years of experience or skills or certifications. We want to build more of those opportunities into the structure across the organization. That's the most obvious one that we usually do. Those are all things that are in the works that will have budget implications. But I think we're managing it within the existing overall budget numbers.
So now this, once again, our pension unfunded. It's gonna be roughly the same amount for what I projected out for 2024 for 2025. And it's about per employee comes out about $80 and change. That's why I mentioned that the burden falls on the housing authority to pay the bill. So that's why I included those positions, even though they're not paid by the housing authority. It's the burden. And that number fluctuates by number of employees. We have more employees as it's a same nut, but the share of the nut gets smaller. And if we have fewer employees, the share of the nut grows bigger. Now, I want to go back to, I know it's kind of early to say it and end it right now, but one of the things that we've done is we've added on our expenses on like certain categories, like with community services and with COCC, working with a city, like the finance department has their own budget. HR has their own budget. Different departments have their own budget. And we're trying to do that in here. Like this year we started doing with HR. Though they're not a revenue generating entity. They have expenses. And Laura wanted to identify the expenses with HR. So we created a separate schedule for HR, so we kind of commingle it with COCC. It's sort of like how COCC, how it used to be is really the merging of maintenance and COCC. That's the COCC budget. Now we're adding another piece of the puzzle, which is HR. On community services, the RACs and RAPs, they wanted their own budget. They want to know how much they could spend. So we created a property for that. They have no revenue, but they have expenditures. So that's one, more pieces of the puzzle, but one big puzzle. As opposed to a 25-piece puzzle, you've got the 1,000-piece puzzle right now.
And it also makes it easier to track expenditures over the year.
Right.
By property, as opposed to it all being commingled, when you can track it, but it takes a little more.
Right.
It's what
And from someone who came from that kind of environment, just like Laura came from that kind of environment, Jeff came out, it's easier to track what the department is spending. And maybe we start looking at that for the future. I mean, now that we're going to be in, a homogeneous, everybody, under the same calendar year budget, we may want to look at property operations, maybe they have their own budget, finance has their own budget, they're not revenue generating, but we have our own expenditures. Maybe we start doing that. I know there's certain auditing requirements now with HCD for community services that we have to start separating the labor costs. So that might be something that's something else now, because for auditing purposes, they want us to separate labor costs associated with community services. We may have to start looking at that. We may have to explore a different mindset in how we look at it financially. The budget will be the same, but how we, like I go back to the puzzle, we're no longer a 50-piece puzzle, kind you give to your grandkids or whatever. You're a 1,000-piece puzzle that you spend a Saturday night on. So the next step is think about whether you want to have a follow-up meeting in July, or you could have it very beginning of August. Because August 14th, because the way how the calendar works out, the board meeting that'll adopt the budget will be August 14th. So it's the last day that you could, like in the 2-week period. Because of how it works out, August 1st is on a Thursday this year. So how the calendar rolls.
I would say as Joe started, I don't think we're expecting a whole lot of changes between now and then. So we're not gonna have a whole lot to report to you beyond what we reported today.
Right.
So we don't think it's necessary, but
It's your discretion.
You want to have
The-
another conversation.
Yeah, the one thing I will be going to the RAC on July 11th, hopefully if they don't change their meeting date. Because I was originally supposed to meet with them in June, but because we put off this meeting till now, I've had to postpone that meeting with them. So it'll be in July. Yeah. At the July meeting to present the budget. And it's for informational purposes than getting any input.
The citywide?
Yeah, I think it's July 11th.
11, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I
don't
think, I haven't heard, I gotta talk to Maria when the
Okay.
next meeting.
Right, I like the idea of people having their own budgets, because I think
Yeah.
it does allow people to plan.
Yeah, I mean,
And set priorities.
Yeah.
What do we want to do with the money we have?
and it's something we may slowly implement, like right now, we're slowly implementing it with with HR. And with the other end, like the other umbrellas, the other little entities under community services. Maybe we have to look at like COCC becomes like the universe. And then under it has a little tiny,
And I think it would have been nice to do it now, because I agree with you. Changing to the fiscal year was a big enough change. Let's get that done. And then next year, this time, we could be looking at a different structure. If we couldn't do it all in 1 year.
No.
Messy enough as it was. You might have an audience. For something. You could- you might have a public comment. Public comment.
I just have
Go
a
ahead.
question.
Sure.
And it may be because I haven't listened well, or because I've not done budgets as a living. But I wanted to know why there was less money put into development activities than ever.
well, it's because it's driven by the projects that they do. I mean, Karen could probably give a better
Yeah.
explanation about it.
So our income is basically based on the developer fees that we earn. And they're earned at the beginning when we start a project, and then when we close our permanent financing. So it's kind of, as was mentioned earlier, it's up and down. So we're
It's down.
basically projecting less developer fee income, the same amount of work. And honestly, we have, fortunately, we have some that we approved before, so we can cover all our expenses for development. But we'll be talking about this a bit at the board meeting, where else, we're working on the Valentine Road project. We also have some other projects in feasibility that may bring in additional developer fees, but we're trying to be a little conservative about how we project that, because you never know how the timing of things is gonna work.
And we can't borrow money from the central office cost center, because they always have a surplus.
Well,
We can't juggle that.
Well, so far, I mean, I've been here about 8 years, and we've always ultimately brought in enough to cover our expenses for the year. And we've been able to save some, and that's funny, that what we save is what we use to cover pre-development costs on our projects, and in some cases, longer term loans to our projects to make them feasible.
Karen, it seems like you're working very close to the wire on that particular items. And the other ones are much more flexible, that's all. 'Cause I don't understand why there's so much more in the others than in the.
Let me actually explain, because I do Karen's job up north, my
Yeah.
day job. What you're looking at is only the result of developer fees that we earn from the developments. It's not the tens of millions of dollars that we're putting into actual developments.
Yeah.
So that what you're seeing are just, you know, the fees, and that's why it goes up and down, and we don't know when we'll get them. But each development has their own budget, and literally there, you know, tens of millions of dollars not reflected there that are going into these new projects we're doing.
Constantly moving.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're only looking at that developer fee portion. There's some things we do that don't earn developer fees. There are other things we do that do. But the development activities are as strong or stronger than they have been in prior years. It's just you would need to look at each different development that we're doing to see the money that's going into that.
Yeah,
If that
so-
answers your question.
And just to build on that a little bit, for every project, we have to raise all the money to cover that project, but that budget is included under the separate limited partnership. And the only thing that comes to the housing authority is the developer fees that we earn, so that's what's reflected.
Thank you.
That was a good question. though.
No. Any questions so far?
I do have a question. You put it on the table of whether or not we thought a July meeting would be necessary, and I'm not saying that it is, but let me just ask you.
Mhm.
Based on the budget that you have proposed today, do you anticipate any changes, anything coming at us that we may not be expecting, anything that we don't have any control?
No,
over?
I mean, if anything, it may be salary, like employee salary related,
Mhm.
but that comes. As always we've done in the past, that comes to the full board through an adoption. You know, if that's the case, we'll have a, special resolution ready. But nothing like earth shattering, like, something happens and like. There's gonna be this added expense, like.
I would say-
All our servers go down, so that's like $100,000 expense that we have to go out, because like,
Don't say that.
Francisco.
Yeah, they say that.
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. So those kind of things, no, I
I
don't
would add
foresee.
this, I fully expect that based on the performance evaluation process, there'll be changes to the job. Because we're doing job descriptions and we're looking at the salary ranges of jobs, that might change when we bring the sort of the salary list of positions to the board. But we're not gonna have that figured out in time for this budget to be adopted. It'll have to come sort of during the budget year. And probably will happen in the fall, I'm guessing. And if there's an action that requires an adjustment to the budget, based on that, we'll bring that back.
Right.
Separately, we won't have that by August.
I think like the only thing that hey, you've been on the board committee and all that, when we always come back and say, okay, we got, this time I only showed you 2 projects that have. But in the past, we've had 4 or 5 that had issues that we've come back and say, okay, we worked on it, now we're down to 3. Then we get to the board meeting, well, okay, we're down to 1. We've got a workable one. This one, you have 2. And as I mentioned with maintenance, they're not a revenue driven thing. It could be, maybe, Letty and I, and we could sit down and take a look at how we could, if there's any expenses we could cut on that. Because it's not a revenue generating entity, outside of its, fee for service, which ends up being a wash in a way to their labor expenses. So, and the only one is development, but that's not, I'm personally not. I'm not losing, I shouldn't say losing sleep, that sounds kind of rude, but I'm not concerned about it.
Karen's gonna deliver.
I lose sleep over it, but.
Yeah, I know, that it's always the development directors that lose
Yeah.
sleep over those
But-
fees.
And if I just want to add to on the performance evaluations and salaries, Joe does an amazing job at that 30%. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and that's the largest buffer that I've seen. So even though we do have the performance evaluations coming up, and, you know, I've been taking a look at all of them and seeing where, you know, some individuals, the increases, those that are gonna be eligible for, we're gonna be okay as far as that. So, you know, he has projected enough with that 30% that we're not gonna come back to you and say, it's like, okay, we're gonna need, you know,
A
we're gonna
bajillion.
go over by all of
Right.
this. So, you know, on that, you know, him and his team, they've done a great job with that buffer, with that 30%. So I feel very confident on that aspect. Thank you. With the salaries.
And I'm actually, really, supportive of a performance-based, a merit system, because the reason we're here is to serve the residents. The reason we can serve the residents, it's not the board, it's the staff. And so I think, to the extent that, we can reward a performance, it's to everyone's benefit to do that. So I'm really happy that we're looking at that.
And I will say, it's a humongous shift for the
Yeah.
agency. And it's a big work effort.
Yeah.
But in the end, once we get past this first year of,
Yeah.
it will become more normalized, but it has been a huge effort to do this. Because our employees are doing the performance evaluation at the same time they're doing the compensation study, which requires them to sort of describe their job duties. And so there's, both of this are happening at the same time, and it's a big burden, but
And
in
then
the end,
yeah.
we'll be in a really strong place.
And on top of that, the supervisors and the directors were doing their portion of the employee evaluations and then reviewing the job descriptions that the staff did for themselves. So it was a lot. So, yeah, it's, I know a lot of them are finishing everything up so that we can meet the deadline. So everyone's going crazy at this moment, but it's the first year, so it's new and it's different, but it's, the first time is always difficult, but we'll get through it.
Great.
And I know you're always concerned about, we're not the services that we provide aren't being sacrificed. I know you always make that, you're always concerned about that.
That's my job.
We're all concerned about that. Self-expresses it more loudly than we do,
Yeah,
but
I just want to reiterate.
So the recommendation is to provide feedback. And if you have, that's sufficient for what we needed today. If you think we're in good shape, you just come back at the April 14th meeting for budget approval.
August 14th.
August 14th, we'll do that. If that works for you, if you want to have another meeting, we can schedule.
yeah, the one thing that I would add, again, because the developer fee,
Yeah.
is something that always generates, that line item might be to just show in a column off to the side.
Oh, like what we did last year.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. The amounts that are
Yeah.
due.
I think it was like 8,027,000
Yeah.
last year.
I think it's just good for people to know that that's, because
Yeah.
you're right, we can't, the developer fee. comes
Yeah,
as able
it's,
to-
like I said, you gotta keep in mind that we operate on a zero-based budgeting, so.
Mhm.
Like what Karen has and like set aside, that's really not reflected. It used to be, but it kind of went against, you have one item, one entity that you do a carry forward there, but everybody else is, nope, you wiped your slate clean. So it's not, you're not comparing apples and apples in that case.
Okay, so for final thoughts, Safa.
It looks good to me, and I rely on you to provide us with honest answers, and there's nothing more than I can do as far as questions. I've done my due diligence, so I feel happy.
Do you feel there's a need for another finance and ops meeting before the August 14th?
At this point, no, that was the reason
Okay.
for my question.
Right.
Is there any anticipated big changes, anything we should be keeping an eye on,
No.
that would
I mean,
require merit a second?
No,
meeting?
unless something comes up between now and then,
Right,
I don't foresee anything.
and unless something comes up, I don't foresee the
Yeah.
need for a meeting in July either.
Kate?
I'm with Sulfa.
Your thoughts?
I agree. I trust Joe. He has always provided us with good information and then I trust my board members and their questions, and I'm still learning a little bit about all of this, so I don't think we would need another meeting either.
And I concur with my fellow committee members. I think that you've done what we usually do in finance and ops sessions 1 and 2 into this first one. And I think that was good to have a little bit of additional time probably so that it could be
Oh,
honed in.
yeah, the 12, 15, 20, that was like
Yeah.
a headache.
So,
I'd love to put forth a motion, but I'm not sure what it should be.
I don't think there's a motion.
There's not a motion, it's just actually,
Provide feedback, what you've done.
Yeah.
okay.
no, and we can, tell the full board that the recommendation of
Yeah.
the finance and operations
Right,
committee
right.
is
And like-
supportive.
And like I said, if you get something, you wake up in the middle of the night, let's have a meeting, you know, just as long as you avoid the week of July 8th.
No worries.
No, there's like a certain 3-letter person, entity, monster coming out.
I'm on.
It's not the FBI.
But I'm partner, yes, I'm glad I could work out July 8th.
Yes.
Yeah, so, good. Okay, anything else before we adjourn finance and operations and move to the full board meeting in 7 minutes?
Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you.
to the-
Yes. Yes, thank you for all the different departments, and Joe is the kind of lead person, but I know all the departments get involved in that, so, thank you.